This is House Planning Help episode 364. Hi there, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in building a new home or retrofitting an existing property. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, is it possible to create affordable, high-quality, community-led housing? What about in London? Yeah, let's make it a bit harder, shall we? Well, I'm pleased to report the answer is yes. My guest is Kareem Dayes, co-founder of RUSS. We often share a resource at the beginning of the podcast, and I thought today, why not make it Community Land Trust Network? Because RUSS is a community land trust. We're obviously going to be exploring this some more in my chat with Kareem, but on the surface, it's a trust that's going to hold property, in this case, in trust for the benefit of the community. And there are various aspects that make it work. For example, there's a board that gets elected, so it's all fair. And in Russ's case, there are a mixture of financial arrangements. So there's affordable rent there. There's a shared ownership model as well, so you can share equity. And residents have control over the decisions being made. Now, there's a good idea. You're going to live there. Let's make that part of the process. And much like co-housing, this is what makes these places, these neighbourhoods, so much better. So I'm excited to get going on this one. I've got one more thing to say, and that is that we have actually made a podcast on RUSS before. We chatted to architect John Broome, and I've listened back to that one. And at the end, I promised there will be a follow-up. Well, there is a follow-up, and this is it now, 9 years later. So yeah, I've let it slip a little bit, but we are following up and we are completing the story as well. And the word on the grapevine is that John is writing a book. So if I get my hands on that book, we'll try and bring John onto the podcast another time. So let's get to our featured interview with Kareem Dayes, co-founder of RUSS. He grew up in Walters Way, which we talked about in the episode with John Broome in that first podcast. So I started by asking Kareem whether he realised at the time how special that place was.
Well, I think, like with all children, we're a bit unaware and naive of the wider context in terms of society and global forces. So I think for a long time I was pretty oblivious to the uniqueness of that place. But obviously with age and experience, it slowly dawned on me like this is not normal. It's quite an exceptional place, especially for London and South London, I think. Opposite a forest, surrounded by trees, waking up in the morning with the sun hitting your face and bird song and like leaves of trees creating that dappled effect. And it's like a really peaceful place to grow up. Being able to play outside a lot with neighbours and friends, feeling safe, knowing all your neighbours. And yeah, obviously moving out, trying to find my own way. I think the penny dropped at some point. Yeah.
Was that a moment you remember that you thought, I'm actually going to go home and ask some questions here?
Yeah, well, we were always grew up with the story. So my dad and, my mum and my dad were both very active people in the community. My mum was a teacher at local primary school, a yoga teacher. So we always had people coming over, and it was a very open house. Like it was kind of like a place where people would meet. And so I kind of grew up with the story of the place. And, my dad continued to do work. He extended it twice. Once when my younger brother was born, he did an extension, self-built that. So we lived through that. And then he basically rebuilt the house, which we helped him with, put in ground source heat pump, re-insulated, triple glaze, PVs. And that journey opened up a whole conversation around microgeneration and sustainability, because their buildings were beautiful and amazing spaces, but they were very energy inefficient. So that work, basically rebuilding the house to bring it up to a better specification, that I think that was the moment when it was like, this way of doing housing obviously has something to offer. And the fact that it was affordable housing, it was on public land. We're in the midst of a housing crisis, but as far as we could tell, it hadn't really been done again in the 30 years from when they finished. So yeah, that was really the starting point to think, well, this works, and it was a great success, but it's old now and we need a modern contemporary iteration to help meet the challenges that the next generation are facing in the housing market.
And how or when did you start to think, oh, well, maybe I can get involved with a project?
It was when I moved out to Sanford Housing Co-op, which is a housing co-op in New Cross Gate. And the rent there is really cheap. I think I was a student at the time. I think I was paying like £50 a week or something ridiculous. For student accommodation now, I think what students pay like that is in the middle of London. And that was off the back of it being a housing co-op set up in the 70s. It's got its own backstory, similar to what was Way. They're debt-free. The rent was just all surplus at that point because it's just been there so long. So that living there and then discovering housing cooperatives and all the philosophy and the politics behind that, just kind of putting two and two together really with the self-build, microgeneration, cooperative. And then one of the people who lived there, Joseph Davis Coates, he's got a company called United Diversity, and he specializes in helping people kind of bring these kinds of things to fruition in terms of the governance side. And he basically told me about community land trusts. I said to him, this is what I want to do. And he was like, what you want to do is set up a community land trust. And then he sent me all these links to other community land trusts in the country and abroad and explained that model. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like the thing to do. So,
what is a community land trust?
It's a charitable organization set up to steward communal assets for the benefit of the community. So it could be a piece of land, it can be a shop, it could be a pub, any community asset. And the idea is it manages it on the basis of creating that wider community value. And in the context of housing, it's often the case, I think, in rural communities, a farmer realizes that local people can't afford to live in the area because second home, people moving from London, and so he might gift a piece of land to be developed for the local community, and then the land trust are the stewards of that land, and then they develop it on a non-profit basis and get the houses to local people at an affordable level. But then the point is, I think what makes a community land trust different to a cooperative is that it's about affordability and perpetuity. So the people who come in after the first time, there's some mechanism where it doesn't just go out to the private market. Like Walter's Way was social housing, people off council housing, and it was built really inexpensively and people were given the option to rent or buy. Eventually everybody bought, but then they bought privately and now they're sold, on the market for profit and they go for big money. So it was affordable for those first people, but anyone who wants to live there now is certainly not. So a community land trust, the main feature I think is that going for that affordability and perpetuity, whether that's pegging the price to income or average local incomes, or the way we've done it is that you get your money back plus inflation, essentially, consumer index. So no one's going to profit on the uplift of the market from when we've moved in. But the point is, when we have moved in, the price we paid is under. We wouldn't have been able to afford to get a 4-bed anywhere else, so it's not for everybody. So for some people, that put a lot of people off, and that's fair enough. But I think everyone who's moved in here has moved in on the principle that housing isn't a commodity. It's just an essential thing of life, and we want to make it affordable for ourselves and the people who come after us.
So had some of the residents actually not heard of this way of being able to live in a property? Was it new that you were having to just even sell the model before you even thought of all the difficult things that are going to come afterwards?
I think for some people that's true, but for others, they knew about this kind of thing, co-housing, co-ops, community land trusts, there's a bit of a buzz around that. For a lot of people, they had heard of it. I mean, some people have heard of it and tried to do it in the past and weren't able to, and or had a vision or a dream that they wanted to live somewhere like this. And RUSS popped up on their radar and there's people locally who are doing it. Why don't we try and join? So I think there's a bit of both going on there. For some people, it's totally new, and others, it was something they spent some time thinking about. Yeah.
So the first thing that I've noticed being here on site is it's quite a big project, a big scheme. So you've got that. Mm-hmm. You've also got the fact that you've mentioned not many other schemes necessarily to draw upon. Walter's Way was a long time ago. My goodness, this is just such a huge challenge. Where did you start? Is there a path?
Yeah, I think because of Walter's Way, we had a network and we had social capital we were able to tap into from day one. So a good example of that would be somebody like John Broome, who was the architect at Walter's Way. He was, the apprentice of Walter Seagal. But since 1985, he's been doing self-build. Like, he's built a career around doing self-build, and that's his thing, right? And I was able to just, I think he even called me. I didn't even call him. I think he called me and said, by the way, there's this bit of land you should have a look. And I think for a lot of people starting out, you don't necessarily immediately have access to that kind of social capital or knowledge capital.
So is John at the heart of this, really? He's a great guy.
He's been involved from the start. I mean, it's not just John, but he's...
Well, when was the start? I feel like this is a project I've been watching for years, so it's quite exciting to get here.
RUSS was created in 2009, and that was very much blue sky thinking, a group of family and friends, and I'm with my brothers and a friend of mine, Wayne. We set up a record label because we're musicians, and we did all these gigs and events to raise money to create RUSS. So RUSS was created off the back of a series of events and workshops which we hosted, talking about sustainability, talking about the housing crisis, and basically saying we want to do a self-build, sustainable, affordable housing thing, and we want people to join. And then what's nice about the community land trust model or community benefit societies is that you can do these non-profit share issues. So once we'd created RUSS, we did a non-profit share issue whereby I think we raised about £20,000, where people just buy some shares in the organisation. There's no dividend, there's no profit, but it's one vote per member, regardless of how. So somebody could have 1,000 shares, somebody could have one share, but it's still one vote each. And that's what's the same as a cooperative. So that's kind of a cooperative principle. And so we built up a head of steam in terms of we built up the membership to a few hundred people. We got some money in the bank. And I think somewhere during that point, John heard about what we were doing and said, obviously he lives locally, he knows the family, he got in touch and says, did you know there's this bit of land out the back, because his parents' house where he grew up backs onto this site. I think by that point, this site had been empty for 10 years. And there'd been some issues around him wanting to turn it to travel the site and whatnot. And so when John got in touch, we had this vision of affordable, self-build, sustainable homes. We built up a membership. We had some money in the bank. That's all just like blue sky thing, but it wasn't associated to a particular piece of land. And I think that's 2012, I believe, is when we first wrote to Lewisham Council about this site.
So describe this site. I have a feeling it was an awkward site with quite a lot of issues to solve on it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Who owned it? All of those sorts of things.
It's owned by Lewisham Council. It was a primary school. The primary school got knocked down, I think, in 2005. So maybe not quite 10 years it was empty. But I mean, by the time we finished, it was nearly 20 years. And then it just been empty. And I think there's a rule that every local authority has to have a traveller site, and Lewisham doesn't have one. So it was earmarked for that. That got blocked in planning from local opposition to do with access, because it's a small cul-de-sac with a very small road. And I think they'd shown that with caravans coming down here just wouldn't have worked in terms of the turning circles. So there was that. So our kind of desktop analysis at the start was like, this is a tricky site and it's been a bit contentious for the local authority. But, this was, at that time, the terminology housing crisis had just kind of entered the lexicon. People were talking about housing crisis a lot, and the local authority was elected on the basis of building X number of homes to meet the needs of an ever-expanding waiting list for social housing. So we wrote to them in a very collaborative, open way to say, look, because Lewisham owned the site where Walter's Way was built, so it was very much, the pitch was very much, you did this thing in the 80s, it was a huge success, why don't you do some more? We're a group, we're organised, we've got ourselves together in terms of our membership, all our governance, fundraising, and John and some other architects, we've been working with friends of ours, Steve and Johnny, we've done some really basic viability, like this is what could fit on this site. And then we got a grant from the National Community Land Trust Network to do a proper viability study. So we started putting the numbers to it, cash flowing it in terms of the rent and the equity and the density. I think John put something together, 33 homes with a mix. And we did, and from the beginning we said we want to be a mixed community. So the idea of having social rents, affordable rents, shared ownership, shared equity. So a spectrum whereby there are some people buying equity, there's some people renting. we want to live in a mixed community. We don't want to live in a community where it's all one type of person or one kind of income. Like we want it to be, there's something for everybody here. And so that was always an intention. I think what we were really good at is having these kind of round tables and workshops and gathering all the ideas and then turning that into something coherent and organized. So we created our 10 principles. We did this viability study and we started, so every time we went to the council, we were like a bit further along. And then eventually we got a grant from the GLA for the community right to build. And that was a grant of like 187,000. That was to get us to planning. And at that point, I think Lewisham started taking us really seriously because they're like, well, they're bringing money to the table. And I think the council strapped for cash. They can't necessarily raise the money required to develop a site like this. So the fact that we're able to access grant money or investment, which they, for whatever reason, weren't able to. For them, it's like, well, if we collaborate, potentially there's a way of bringing investment into the brand and getting housing built, which otherwise wouldn't be built. And I think we found a way to form a really good collaborative partnership with them. And yeah, it's taken a long time, but we've got there ultimately. So yeah.
There must be a few key moments. So is one of those when Lewisham said, yes, this is now going to be your site if you can do this, that and the other. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think it was 2015 we became the preferred bidder, but there was a whole process before that. So they employed somebody, a guy called Lev, who now runs the community-led housing hub, to kind of help them navigate the procurement process for this site. And in terms of, the legal, the financial, and like, how do we actually do this? I think the principles behind procurement is that if there's a publicly owned asset, the council needs to be shown to have gone through a process whereby they can demonstrate they're getting best value for the site. And usually it comes down to a financial bid. So whoever offers the most money gets a site, because that money means that goes back into the council and they can pay for services and whatnot. But we had managed to make the argument that the social value of affordable housing, of self-build, of building housing for local people needs to be taken into consideration. It can't just be a purely financial, because as a non-profit organisation with limited funds, we obviously a private developer could offer a lot more cash up front for a piece of land. So I think usually at that point is when most projects probably go awry because you get outbid. But because of the relationship we'd built up and the conversations we'd had as part of that procurement, the social value of sustainability, self-build, community-led, it was baked into the process. So that was scored equally to the finances. And so anybody bidding for the site had to demonstrate that it was going to be self-build, it was going to be sustainable, and it was going to be affordable housing for local people.
Did right to build come into any of this? I can't remember.
Only financially, in that as part of right to build, there was some grant money. And I think the GLA administered that for London. So we were able to apply for that grant funding, which, we got £187,000 grant to pay for all the works up to planning. But it ended up being spent on all the works to win the procurement process. So the full professional team you need to build up the design and concepts. It's like a proper big, thick 200-page document to submit.
Did you ever get to the point where actually you don't have enough money to do this stage or that stage?
Well, yeah.
What happens then at that point?
Yeah, well, you have to raise more money. And I think that happened a couple of times on this project whereby, you have your plans and something comes up and we either raise more money or this is the end. And thankfully, we were able to raise the money to get over those humps. And
how? Is it going back to what you said before, or?
Well, it's a combination of things. I think it's about momentum. I think, for example, once we become preferred bidder, if we're going back to funders and supporters to say, well, now we have a legal stake in this site because we're named preferred bidder, and as long as we can get through planning, we have a deal in place whereby we can get a lease to build. So that's a step ahead of where we were prior to that stage, where it was just like, well, we're hoping Lewisham will support us. But now we actually have something on paper saying we've won this process. We're now in pole position to develop this site as long as we can get through planning and raise the money. So it's like that chicken or egg scenario. You can't get the land to get the money. You can't get the money to get the land. But it's like you're having these conversations in parallel and you're nudging each one a millimeter along. And I think thankfully, we were able to get enough social investors on board, enough grant money on board to show that the model could pay back the loans that are involved. So it's a mix of everything, really. And so we've got Triodos as the main lender, but we've also got CAF Venturesome, who did a grant which became a loan after we got planning. We have Big Issue Invest involved. We had Advance from the Cooperative, Tudor Trust. There's a whole list we should send to you before you put this podcast on so that they're all named.
It's just interesting because now that we've got a different model of how the value of your property is not as it is on the commercial market, you can't just pour money in thinking at the end it's going to be worth this value, can you? So I'm just trying to get it clear in my mind.
Well, with equity, a lot of the loan is paid off on the equity which is sold. So the fact that there's the number of homes that there are and the amount of equity we're selling means on day one when people move in and get their mortgages, a lot of the debt is cleared. But there's going to be a long-term mortgage which RUSS will be paying off from the rental income. So the rents on the shared ownership and the rental homes will pay the monthly interest payments on that mortgage.
So that's finances parked for now. I'm sure we'll come back to that in a minute. What about planning permission?
Yeah, I mean, it was tricky. There was a lot of issues with the site. I mean, it's the access is an issue. It's on a floodplain. The self-build became, part of a planning requirement. Sustainability, the materiality, the look. There were a lot of things, and we managed to negotiate. Meetings with the EA and the planning board, and so the landscaping is really important as well. So as part of that, how we were going to plant it up and bring the greenery back as screening, and so there were a lot of things at play. And we were working with Archetype at the time. We got the design. We had co-design sessions with the residents because we'd balloted by then, so we'd picked our resident group through ballot. And they co-designed with Archetype. And we were successful in putting that all together, submitting and getting the planning permission. But the issue was, we had Archetype were working with a quantity surveyor to make sure that it's all on budget. But when we actually went out to market for the design that they'd done, it was just there was a problem, basically, in terms of not being able to afford it. And I think we were talking about timber frames. Was it CAD? That kind of engineered wood,
engineered timber.
Yeah, that basically that came in really expensive, like way more expensive than they'd hoped. And then there's Grenfell, so you can't put anything flammable on the material in terms of the cladding, and I think there was just a general kickback against using wood, cost wise, and even though Grenfell had nothing to do with timber, there's just an issue around that. So we came to a fork in the road, and I wasn't involved in this conversation, but the decision was made to part ways with Archetype, and then we appointed SEH. So they took over, and then it went through a whole exercise of getting the costs down, basically. So there was some pretty big changes. As you can see, it's concrete, it's not timber. I think that's probably the biggest one.
So what about that decision then? Did you just think, well, this is a finance thing, we've tried?
Well, I think with these things...
So just going for this for a second, concrete is just plain out going to be cheaper than all routes of timber? You've explored all of that, or how does it work?
As far as I know, we explored all the options, and I think ultimately the choice comes down to, do you want to hold on to your perfect ideals and not do it, or are you willing to compromise and do it? And I think at that point, so much had been committed in terms of time, energy, resource, money, that I didn't feel like it was much of a choice. Like you make the compromise and you do it, because it's like you're not really willing to say, well, we've wasted X number of years and hundreds of thousands of pounds, let's walk away. And I think there is a value in this building which is beyond the materiality, and which, not to say the materiality shouldn't be taken into account, but I think in the long term, what is beyond the materials is going to have such a big impact that it was the right choice. Yeah.
So we're coming back to cost again for a moment.
Yeah.
When you got those initial costs put together, when you were working with Archetype, what was it that made that too expensive? What, do you have a per square meter project cost, or, what was it that then led you to have to come down?
Well, it's just thinking realistically about the amount of money we could raise and pay, what we could pay for, basically. And I think Archetype would say that RUSS wanted a lot. We wanted to do a lot of things, and we wanted to do everything. And I think ultimately that does bring a cost element into play. I think particularly in terms of sustainability, important if you want passive house, if you want, like for example, the MVHR, like only 3 of the self-builders have the MVHR, everyone else has got MEV. Yeah, I think if you're going for that higher spec because of that ambition, it comes with a cost. But ultimately, I think looking at the model and wanting to keep it affordable and thinking about how much we can raise and pay the money back, you just couldn't make it work. I mean, I'm sure when you talk about things like passive house and self-build, like in a piece of land where there's easy access and you're not in London, and maybe it could be done cheaper, but I think the reality of London, I think somebody sent me a link to an article about the worst places in the country to do self-build. Some surveyors had done this data thing and they looked at planning, tradespeople, a number of factors, and they basically, Tower Hamlets was the worst place and Lewisham was the second worst place. And that's not to say that it can't be done, but I just think the reality of being on the ground is like, the amount of money that's gone on legal costs to like around this site and getting all the paperwork together, like it's huge. And it's our first time doing it. I think, our next one, I'm pretty sure we could do it for less because we've got the know-how now and that experience behind us, which is part of that social value I'm talking about in terms of doing it, surviving, and then being able to like reflect on it and improve on it. And I think there's definitely room to improve on it. But in terms of the challenges we had to deal with in the moment, I think we've really done the best we could. And ultimately, this site would have remained empty if this wasn't here. So, and I don't know what value anyone's getting from an empty brownfield site next to a council depot. So, and living here, like, it's beautiful. I love it here. So, yeah.
You don't have to justify it. I understand. Well, just coming back to the concrete and the design then, so can you describe what you did finish up with and some of those decisions that you had to make to lead to this final design?
Yeah. I mean, what we have ended up with is something which is quite remarkable in terms of the way it's set out, in terms of the communal walkways. There's a feeling on, I said it the other day, we had a party and I was like, growing up in Walker's Way and Sanford, when I sit out at the front of my balcony and I'm chatting to my neighbours, it really like strongly, evocatively brings memories of living at Walker's Way and Sanford. And I think that's remarkable to think it's built in a completely different way. It looks the right elements of it which look a little bit like Walker's Way. I think something about the colours and the lines, the vertical lines. And I know John was mentioned the way the concrete's being used and the studs, it's actually a similar way of building in terms of like, you've got these pillars holding it and then you've got the spaces between which you're filling in. But I think for me more is just the feet. For some reason, when I walk around this site, it reminds me of Walker's Way, it reminds me of Sanford. And I just think, as somebody who's not an architect, I find that quite remarkable that it can be in a different place, a different space and a different time, but feel like there's that connection. I've never experienced that with a building, so...
I think there are a couple of elements to that. There's all the work you've put in. That will make it feel like Walker's Way. Because you know this place back to front. Yeah. And then you've just got this, London is just amazing. All these crazy little, you go past some Victorian cottages almost to arrive here, don't you? And then you've got fantastic views, as you've talked about. We can see Canary Wharf with the flashing light on top in the distance. So you've built in opportunities to take in all these views. And I think the landscaping is starting to kick in. So yeah, that's it. That's the exciting bit, isn't it? It's what we're doing it for.
It's absolutely. No, it is exciting. I think, and just like sitting down, having a glass of wine with my neighbours, I love it. Where else do you get to do this? And we all get on really well so far, touch wood. But I think this idea of just like being able to come out your front door and just like the kids can just go and run free and like, they're safe and they're going into their neighbors' houses. We're sharing tools and ideas, and like it's so organic. Like we don't have to plan. Like, and if we need somebody to come and watch the kids for an hour or two, like I just love that. It just feels more human because I haven't had it since I left Sandford, Watersway, and all the other places I've lived. I haven't had that, and to have it back in my life, and now I've got kids. Because when I started this project, I didn't have kids, so it was all through the eyes of a kind of idealistic single young person. But now I'm experiencing it through the eyes of a parent and seeing my kids inhabit it and seeing the benefits to them from day one is mind blowing, and it really brings it home as to like why we did this, because I'd forgotten that and got stuck in the trenches and the stress of it all for the last 18 months or so. But then just seeing them light up and like making the most of it and just enjoying the space so much, it really makes me think, it was worth it. I'm glad we did this.
So what are some of those design features? What were you talking about? You have this blank piece of space. Is the massing of the buildings something that's fairly simple to begin with? Or could you have laid it out a few different ways? And are you encouraging interaction? Or you've got a common space as well, haven't you? So just describe maybe some of what was on your brief and how it's...
Yeah, well, we definitely wanted to have a space where the community could come together. So that's where the community hub comes from. And from day one, it was like, communal open gardens. This idea of private gardens was never going to work. Let's just make it open so everybody can enjoy all the space. The communal walkways came about as a way of creating more outdoor space which we could share. And you've seen some of the people planted up and they've got their plants outside their front door. They've got table and chairs, they can have their coffee. And there's the light wells coming through. It's this idea of a more kind of outdoor communal space. And then the idea of it being like a floating garden. So we're going to have cables coming up with creepers going up. There's going to be plants everywhere. And then one of the design features from down the road, the planners wanted us to maintain this view that goes through the site from the road through to the depot. And there's a tree. There's a silver birch tree. So the fact that there's that opening in the middle came from that. But that's become a feature. And then we've got the two walkways which connect, but they're quite transparent so that they don't interrupt that view. And they're going to be covered in plants as well. What are the other features? I think that the balconies are the main thing, I think, and the communal gardens in terms of just having those, creating opportunities for interactions where you see your neighbours and you meet each other. And then other than that, I think it's really, obviously it's south facing that way, so you're making the most of that. The bike storage, the bins, all that, it's about, and they are made of timber, so that, and they've got the green roofs. The thing about when we had to switch out the wood, what we do have on the cladding is designed to look like a natural wood material. And then the individual colours, the facade on each home, there was I think a combination of 6 different colours people could pick, so people got to choose the colour they have. And I think that's something similar to Waters Way, because in Waters Way our house was red. Our neighbours was green, and people would go, which house should I go to? Go to the red house at the bottom, or go to the blue house at the top, or go to the... That was kind of how we got... And so you can kind of do that here. Like, I'll go to the blue house on the ground floor, go to the yellow house on the first floor, like, as opposed to like number or whatever. What else is it? It's difficult to remember, because the co-design was so long ago, it's actually really hard to remember. It was like 2000 it must have been 2015.
You mentioned that word co-design. So what does that mean? Is there a small group of you working with the architecture firm?
Well, at that time, all the residents were invited to a series of workshops and different themes. There might have been a landscape theme, then there might have been like a materials or the colours. But then when we appointed SEH, it was a little bit architect-led, where it was architect-led to get us to survive. The compromises had to be made. But then there was a bit more co-design towards the end. We had to choose the colours, a few little decisions here and there. And we had a project board made up of members and residents who kind of were more close contact with the architects and the professional team on a regular basis. But then things were fed back to the residents and we'd feed back. So there might have been choices about this door, that kind of door or window. And people got to choose their kitchens, what kind of kitchen they had, got to choose the flooring in the kitchen and the bathroom, because when the flooring, in the self-finished ones, the floorings in the kitchen and the bathroom had to be done to make it mortgageable. So people got to choose that kind of, and some people elected not to have their kitchen fitted so they could do their own kitchen or choose what kind of tiles they want. But I think most of the customization at the business end was really down to whether or not to choose the self-build route. And of the 36 homes, only 5 people elected to do the self-build, the full self-build. Everyone else is self-finish. And of the 5 self-builders, they've elected not to have the false ceiling in. It completely changed the arrangement of the inside. We made a couple of small changes to our layout, made our kitchen a bit bigger, changed our downstairs utility room, bathroom configuration. And obviously we put the MVHR, which was a big customization. And because we did our own lighting and our own plumbing, we just got to, obviously with that comes a lot more choice in terms of the fixings and the way that's done, where the light switches are, the kind of lights we've got. And I guess also having done it from a shell and knowing where it all is, like I know like if I want to make changes, you know, where I can, and like put extra patching in, for example. I know we put in extra patching. I know Will and Amy put in extra patching. And yeah, so because we know how it's built on the inside, I think we've got that option to customize even more now if we want to. Yeah, but to be fair though, the self-finishes, they've all done between them, like you can see how different they've done with that. Like the kitchens all look very different, different flooring, different decorating. Like even within that, there's quite a lot of customization which has gone on.
So let's talk about construction then. So you've obviously got someone who's going to be putting up the shell for some of these, some of the properties completed further. So how on earth did you arrange that? And
yeah, well, it was an ongoing kind of like conversation which just kept going around and around in terms of when the self-builders could get on site and how much could be self-build. But I think when we got to the crunch time, for loads of different reasons, it ended up basically the main contractor built the shells. So when the self-builders got on site, it was watertight and fireproof. So the windows were in, all the external walls were done, and the services had come to one point. And then so basically we took over from the rest. So in terms of the partition walls, all the walls inside, all the wiring, the plumbing, the ceilings, which I've touched on, kitchens, bathroom, we did everything else from that point.
What skills did you have? I know I've met your brother who's an electrician.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was handy with a drill and a saw, a bit of DIY, but not trained, certainly not professional. So I just think keen and like I'd done stuff with my dad at what was way, you know, like, but I would say I was a good labourer. A labourer who's happy using power tools, I think would be my category. So yeah, and a lot of it is labour, like, you know, lifting plasterboard. So I hadn't done any like plasterboarding. So there's a lot of plasterboarding and dry lining. That was quite an intense bit of it. To be fair, the thing I'm most proud of is hanging the ceiling. Like doing the metal frame ceiling was like, and then I did a lot of that on my own just because of other people having work and stuff. And there's a bit of a knack plasterboarding a ceiling solo. I learned how to do that. Well, the ceiling for me was really daunting. I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that, but I just had to. Yeah, and constructing the walls, that was, and to be fair, it was quite fun, like working with the metal studs, because we thought it was going to be wood, but the main contractor provided all materials for us to do the walls and the ceiling, so we ended up using the same system they used. And I was a bit daunted about using the metal first, but actually once you get your head around it, it's actually, I think, a lot easier working with the metal than it is with wood, in terms of building it straight and quickly and whatnot. So I enjoyed working with the metal studs, getting the U-track in the floor and the ceiling. So doing the walls was the first thing, and then running the services. My wife did the plumbing. All the women on the self-builders had somebody come and train them around laying the pipes, so they laid all the pipe work for all the water. My brother's an electrician, but I ran the cables with them, and then they obviously do the bit at the end to connect it and the consumer unit and all of that. A lot of the services are in the ceiling, so most of the services are fixed to the concrete slab in the ceiling, and then they come down into the walls. So doing that, and then plasterboarding when we started, I was terrible at it. Putting the plasterboard on the wall, it just looked rubbish. But then by the end, I was actually doing it quite quickly, cutting it the right size. You know, if you cut it too big, it doesn't fit, and then you got to cut it again. But then if it's not tight enough, you've got these big gaps, and you don't want big gaps because then you've got to fill them and then they're going to crack. So there's a knack to that. One of the last big jobs, the dry lining. So we didn't plaster because plastering would have been too much money. If I'd had the cash, I would have paid someone just to plaster, but couldn't afford that. So we just did the dry lining, taping and filling the joins, sanding it, filling it again, sanding it, filling it again, but like for the whole house. And it was a lot of work. And getting the corners looking nice. So yeah, and it's labouring, but like if you want it to look nice, it's skill involved. So getting there. I'd say at this point, if my friend was doing it and he needed a hand, I think I could give him a few pointers to make it look nice from day one, so they don't make the same mistakes I made.
Let's just have a quick reminder of the timeline then. So we've talked about some of those key stages, but when did construction begin? When was all the planning through?
So I think we became preferred bidder 2015. I think we maybe got planning 2017. I need to check this. But
just roughly.
Roughly, but then start on site must have been like 2020, 2019 maybe. I don't know when we started, something like that. And then the self-builders, we're now 24. So we went on site, it must have been January 23. So we spent all of 2023 and then we moved in April, yeah. So self-builders got on site January 23. Maybe December 22, give or take. There was just delay after delay. At every stage, something happened which delayed it. And it was quite stressful because, making life plans and thinking, well, I should be moving in then, or thinking about work and childcare and schools. It's been a bit of a nightmare, to be honest. Peak stress when we're on site is because we were meant to finish May 23. And RUSS, and they were really putting it on us in terms of it has to be finished May 23. May 23 has to be finished. And it was no one was in until May 24. So,
well, I was going to ask, this is something you get every so often when you've got a lot of different people all coming at it from different angles. Is there a stage where everyone has to be finished and you can consider the project finished?
Yeah. It was building controls. So there was a couple of inspections of building controls. When they come on this date, X, Y, and Z has to be done. Because if it's not, it's going to cost RUSS money, and RUSS hasn't got money. And then the threat was, if you're not keeping up, roof will take over and you'll have to pay for it. So it was stressful, man. It was a stressful 12 months because every time that those deadlines came up, it was a bit of a rush. And then the last one, it had to be signed off because RUSS needed to get the sign off so it could start selling properties and bringing the money in, because RUSS is paying interest, and every delay means another interest payment going to the bank, which means RUSS is going more into the hole. So it was very much this thing needs to be finished or RUSS will go bankrupt. So it's stress, mad amounts of stress. And it's been a year in and already physically and emotionally broken. We've bitten off more than we can chew. But thankfully, and I think being positive, we had loads of people really keen to help us. And I think John came on site regularly, loads of volunteers, loads of people just come and help us. Students, student architects, helping with drawings and stuff, and they all just come and help for free. And to be honest, if we hadn't had the help, we might not have made those deadlines. So I have to really be grateful for the help that we received. But there was a point when I was thinking, this is not how I want to self-build. This level of stress is too much. I'd much rather be in a situation where I can self-build at my pace. And maybe that's an idealistic, naive thought, because when can you ever do anything at your pace? It's just the nature of life, right?
Could you have done anything differently to give yourself a bit more time?
Or to have more money, to pay more people, or to buy the time, because time's money, isn't it? You're either buying the time or you're buying the people. We just never had that money. So I don't know. I think next time I need to get rich before I do it. And I think that's what makes this project so unique, I think, in that self-build, for whatever reason, has a reputation or an identity where it's the preserve of people with money. If you watch Grand Designs, you talk about the sums of money they're talking about. If that's your version of self-build, then unless you've got money, it's not really an option for you. But the whole thing about Water Seagull and working with Lewisham and it being public and it being affordable and communities that actually know, we want to do we want to build affordable housing, which means working with people who don't have all the money to make it easy and buy the time or the people to give you that space. It was difficult and super stressful, but I think it was an important thing to do in that demonstrating that this isn't just for people who've got all the money, and that if we organise ourselves as a community, pool our resources together and work collaboratively, we can overcome some of the major challenges we're facing as a society. And it doesn't always have to be a money thing whereby, you need to be creaming off X amount of profit or paying top dollar. Like, I think, self-build is, people obviously think about the luxury category. No one would choose to live, like, you think, my dream home. You believe that my dream home is next to the council depot, next to a train track. But the reality is, like, in terms of building out homes and places to live, that we're going to have to start using these sites and making the best of them. And actually, this is my dream home in terms of the experience that I have living here, my children have living here, and the people around me.
Well, I think you've got a lot of things going for you, just even on this location. You're so beautifully located. It's quiet outside. I thought I would brace myself for the trains and all the rest of it. It is really quiet. There's vegetation around us. There's a town centre 2 or 3 minutes walk down the road. You have got a lot going for you. And I know what you mean about that starting side, that may not be where you think you're self-builders, but I think you've got something absolutely unique that is a product of all of the time that's gone in. But I know that's a lot of time, a lot of energy. So where are you sitting at the end of this? Has it still been affordable?
Well, yeah, it's a contentious term, isn't it? I mean, depends for who, but I think within the mix, yes, because like I said at the start, you've got people here coming off the housing list from the council waiting list, paying the council rents. We've got the people sharing in the rental units, and their rent, I know for a fact, is you can't get that kind of rent, that kind of quality home around here. And the shared ownership, from my perspective, from the shared ownership, we bit off more than we could chew, because when when we started off, I was single and I was on the list for the rental affordable rents. But obviously, in the decades that have passed,
what, you're joking? You had a relationship over the last 15 years.
Yeah, I've got married. I've got 2 kids. And so I came off that list, and we basically called us and said, which home has the shortest waiting list? The shortest waiting list was for the 4-bed shared ownership. And we were like, cool, put us on that one then. And people dropped out, and that's the one we got. But I can guarantee you we would not be able to afford a 4-bedroom house anywhere in London or the Southeast. It's a stretch. Like, we've got a mortgage, we're paying rent, we've got the service charge, we've got council. Like, it's not cheap. But for us, it was very much like, we're going to live here, or we're probably going to leave London or the UK even. So it's made the difference in terms of us being able to raise our family in the place where I grew up, and we've got all our social connections and opportunities here for the kids. So it's definitely made the difference in terms of us being able to afford a home suitable for us.
Now, a little while back, you mentioned next time, or
Yeah.
So what is next time? Is it using everything that you've learnt through this? Is it for someone else? Is it for you again? What are you thinking at the end of it? Have you got to the end?
Yeah, well, we've still got a few bits to do. It's comfortable now, but we've still got to put up a few radiators, do some of the storage, liquor paint here and there. In terms of the big vision, I know, because, RUSS it's a community land trust. It's not just me, right? There's 1,100 members. We've got a board of trustees. I know for a fact there's people who are super keen to do more like this, using Walter's Way as the analogue again. It was 30 years from that being finished to attempting something off the back of it. We're not going to wait 30 years to do the next one. And we've got all, in terms of Walter's Way, providing that network and that social capital, all of that now is embodied here. And so in terms of our connections, the knowledge capital, and even, with funders and landowners, the organisation is well placed now to take the lessons it's learnt from this and do more and think bigger. And I know people within the team are actively looking at sites. And so if you know any landowners out there who want to work with a CLT, get in touch, because we've got that experience behind us now, that track record. We know what works and what doesn't.
So how would that work? Let's say someone owns privately a piece of land. Mm-hmm. Does it just come back to paying them for it? Or?
Well, I guess there's a number of ways to go. It depends what their principles are. If it could just be a straight transaction, if we can raise the money. Maybe there's somebody who wants to donate a piece of land. I know it's not that far-fetched. Oxford CLT, I know someone donated them a house because the housing crisis in Oxford's so bad. Somebody left them a house in their will and said, well, we want you to help. That's what they wanted to leave behind for their community. So maybe there's someone out there who's got a bit of land and they haven't got the energy to kind of take it on, and maybe they're at a comfortable place and they want to create some social value in their community. That would be amazing.
How much of this do you feel has been a shared process versus what's been on your shoulders? Because, you have been intrinsic in this.
No, it's definitely shared. Like I got off, it was too much for me. I think somewhere around 2016, I took a massive step back because I couldn't do it anymore. My mum passed away and I was really struggling in terms of my mental health and stress. So I took a big step back in 2016. So from then, really, other people have been carrying it. So there's a whole bunch of people. There's Anurag, who's the current chair. We've got Mike Freed, who's done loads. Edina, who I mentioned, in this last few years has been like leading the whole thing. All the trustees we've had in that period is dozens of people. Where we're sitting now, the hub was built by volunteers. Mike Freed, Megan Ancliffe, and a bunch of other people involved in that. Greg, they all built this. I didn't lift a finger. And I think that's the strength of RUSS, in that it's not just one person. And I think that's what sets us apart. And I think that's what we've done really well in terms of renewing our leadership, not building up some cult around a figurehead, but actually distributing it around a collective. But that can get chaotic, but being organized about it and maintaining a clear path and being professional, we've been really good at that. And I think the fact that so many other people have bought into the vision from day one is what's really made it possible. Like if it was just that first group who set it up, we wouldn't probably got here. The fact that other people have got involved and joined and put in energy, and countless people, like it's a long list. It's literally hundreds of people who've put in thousands of hours for no pay.
And what advice would you have for someone who's listening to this who hasn't been scared off and wants to try something like this?
Well, I would say that last thing we touched on is really important. And seeing other groups, and there is a difficult bit when you decide who gets to live here. People begin to get possessive of it. And I think we were there were problems with this, but ultimately I think it helped us in terms of maintaining forward momentum, is that we did the ballot. So we do it's for local people, you got to live or work in the borough. These are the different tenures, and we're just going to ballot. It's not like a thing of, I did so many hours, or I did this, I did that, or I've contributed this. It's like, no. And from the very beginning, and the fact that we're CLT, again, it's a unique feature. It's like, this is for everyone. It's not for an exclusive group. It's for everyone. And we want, and so people have contributed knowing that, most of the people have contributed never intended to live it anyway. So I would say, if you want to do it the CLT route, you've really got to embrace that openness. You've got to find a way of effectively opening it up to the community and letting go of it, and not trying to, I don't know, people, understandably, people get precious about things. And also, burnout. Like if it's just going to be one person or two people running it, sooner or later they're going to burn out. So you've got to have that group, that collective approach, in my opinion.
What have Lewisham Council thought about this now? How does it sit on their radar?
Well, I hope they're proud of it. I think we need to do a bit of work in terms of re-engaging them and getting them on site again. Because, What Was Way, they'd forgotten about it. When we first started, we had to bring them to What Was Way and show them, because they weren't even aware of it. But with this place, I think they're proud of it. I think anything which, and at the end of the day, it's housing. They're getting people off the housing list here. I think the situation is such that they're happy to see something like this happen, because that's 36 more people home with a roof over their head, which they haven't got to worry about ultimately.
But not just that. I find with these communities that have had so much input going into them, they just create these better places. This has got to be good for the borough.
Yeah, I definitely say so. I mean, I'm just, the way I'm answering is because I haven't spoken to them. I don't know.
You're just hoping.
I think at some point we'll have to get them down here.
Definitely get them down here.
I mean, we have had like an event, but I wasn't here, so I'm sure there's been some feedback documented somewhere. But I would assume that they're proud that this is here. Part of our job is to talk about it. I mean, it's a bit soon. Basically, we're still letting the dust settle, get embedded in. I think maybe next year we'll be in a better place to actually be engaging with more energy and wider afield and bringing people here. But at the minute, it's just a bit like we putting ourselves back together a little bit.
Yeah, I think even on a small scale project, because the second you're dealing with more people, even that just to begin with, then the complexity changes and so forth. So is there anything you would have done differently?
When we get into it, there's probably going to be loads of things. I think there's going to be a bit of an exercise of like evaluating where we are and taking stock of the lessons learned. But like I said, it's too soon to say. But for me, the levels of stress and the time, the pressure was too much. So that's one thing. If there's a way of, but like I said, I don't know if there's a way you avoid that. Maybe that's just an inherent part of the game. Because speaking to people in the built environment, it seems to be quite a common feature that even for private developers, that I've seen a couple of schemes around here where it's like they've obviously gone bust mid-project and the thing's half empty and falling to bits, and you think, well, someone took out £1 million loan and that went wrong and they've got nothing now, and that's private. And I just think the amount of stress that would have brought onto somebody is almost unbearable. And somebody told me a pretty harrowing statistic about people in this industry and suicide, and like I can see how, because everything's on the line. You could have your whole life's everything on the line and it could go tits up. And that is a difficult thing to reconcile. And thankfully we made it. But there were points where I didn't think I would, because it's just like, it's all the money plus a decade worth of time, and people are talking about it going south. It's a lot to
You must have felt yourself grow as a person through this.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely, yeah. It broke me, but
I didn't quite mean like that.
Yeah, but then you have to rebuild yourself. So it's like, and just the experience of working with all these different people, communicating, connecting, and like, learned so much from, people who are professionals in what they do. And I've learned a huge amount. I didn't know anything about development when we started, but now I got pretty intimate insight into every bloody stage of it. So, I mean, ultimately I've got a career out of it, because now I work now in community engagement, back in the built environment now, and so it's ultimately created a career for myself, which it's not a career I thought would happen, but like it's just one of the byproducts of doing this is that I'm now getting paid to do it for other people. So I'm only at a point now I'm able to reflect on that and say, well, that's kind of cool.
How would you like to wrap up this conversation? What's your final thought?
Final thought is that for me, creating RUSS, it was bigger than just housing. There's some big picture stuff that we're trying to, as a community, confront, whether that's climate change, inequality, but ultimately it comes down to where we're going as a society. And, you look in the news where you read the reports and like, things are not going in a great direction, and there are some scary things on the horizon. And I think the biggest takeaway for me from RUSS is demonstrating that we can come together and work collaboratively and work collectively to build alternative systems and alternative ways of creating value and sharing that value. That's something I'm going to be taking into other areas. And at some point, maybe not now, but in a few years' time, I hope we're able to reflect on RUSS and like really show that, especially for Londoners or people in the UK, like there's a different way of doing housing and living, like the way we're going to be doing with the shared resources and like I want to set up like a food co-op and like, you know, reducing our waste, things like that. And also thinking about the kids, we all want to live in a safe place, and so we've got the space to be healthy and happy. And I don't think it's too much. I don't think it's a lofty ambition to say everybody should have that. We need to redesign lots of our institutions and our systems to reflect that. Because at the minute, we're inheriting systems which are ultimately designed to extract value for a few and keep it amongst a few. And whichever side of the political fence you sit, I think we can do better. I think the natural inclination is to get political and start shouting about things. But I think what I've learned from this is that I'm going to be focusing my energies on building stuff with people, collaborating. And if you get into the nitty gritty of it, whether that's the legal, the financial, the governance, that's where the work lies, but it can be done. And there are loads of examples, not just here, there's loads of examples of people doing it. And I think when you approach these problems or these crises we're facing with an open mind and wanting to work collaboratively, you'll find that a lot of people want to get on board and be involved. And you might be surprised where they're coming from in terms of their background or their politics might not be what you would expect, but they want to join in, they want to participate. And I think we need more of that, and we need to rebuild huge swathes of what we've inherited, because ultimately we're living in a world that we've inherited, which was built by people who are long gone. But what are we going to leave behind for the people who come after us? And I think it's a really important question right now. So that's how I'll leave it.
Kareem, thank you very much.
Yeah, nice one. Thank you, Ben. Cheers.
Get more in our show notes today, which you can find at houseplanninghelp.com/364. We've got all the main information in the summary that we provide, so you can work your way through that and check out some photos as well of the project as it advances through the various stages to completion. If you've got a comment or you'd like to ask a question, well, you can either scroll down to the bottom of the show notes or head on to social media. We'll give you links. And of course, we'll link you to the RUSS website, houseplanninghelp.com/364. Finally, my call to action is to come and check out the Hub. And this is the membership community that I run alongside House Planning Help. And the idea is I'm just trying to make life easier for you. That's the plan of it anyway. And we do that with a vault full of digital resources. I've spent quite a long time on different building sites filming for you as well. So we've got our in-depth video case studies, so you can watch those and learn from the decisions being made. We've got Ask the Expert. We bring on various different experts so you can chat and pose your particular question or chat to me in office hour, which is a weekly call where you can just drop in, even if it's just for 5 minutes, for a quick update or question or chat. We've got the courses, we've got the live training, we've got the forum where you can network with all the other members. Come and find out more, houseplanninghelp.com/join. That's us for today. Thanks for being there. Really enjoyed this. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media. Content that matters.